Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. This morning we'll be in Genesis chapter 31, verse 17, through chapter 32, verse 12. Jacob in a dream was immediately was told to return to the land of his father. And he discusses it with his wives and ends up setting out. In Genesis 31:17, so Jacob immediately put his children and his wives on the camels. He took away all the livestock he had acquired in Paddan Aram and all his movable property that he had accumulated. Then he set out toward the land of Canaan to return to his father Isaac. While Laban had gone to shear his sheep, Rachel stole the household idols that belonged to her father. Jacob also deceived Laban the Aramean by not telling him that he was leaving. He left with all he owned. He quickly crossed the Euphrates River and headed for the hill country of Gilead. 3 days later, Laban discovered Jacob had left, so he took his relatives with him and pursued Jacob for 7 days. He caught up with him in the hill country of Gilead. But God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream at night and warned him, "Be careful that you neither bless nor curse Jacob." Laban overtook Jacob, and when Jacob pitched his tent in the hill country of Gilead, Laban and his relatives set up camp there too. "What have you done?" Laban demanded of Jacob. "You've deceived me and carried away my daughters as if they were captives of war. Why did you run away secretly and deceive me? Why didn't you tell me so I could send you off with a celebration, complete with singing, tambourines, and harps? You didn't even allow me to kiss my daughters and my grandchildren goodbye. You have acted foolishly. I have the power to do you harm, but the God of your father told me last night, 'Be careful that you neither bless nor curse Jacob.' Now, I understand that you have gone away because you longed desperately for your father's house. Yet, why did you steal my gods?" "I left secretly because I was afraid," Jacob replied to Laban. "I thought you might take your daughters away from me by force. Whoever has taken your gods will be put to death. In the presence of our relatives, identify whatever is yours and take it." Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. So Laban entered Jacob's tent and Leah's tent and the tent of the 2 female servants, but he did not find the idols. Then he left Leah's tent and entered Rachel's. Now Rachel had taken the idols and put them inside her camel's saddle and sat on them. Laban searched the whole tent, but did not find them. Rachel said to her father, "Don't be angry, my lord. I cannot stand up in your presence because I am having my period." So he searched thoroughly, but did not find the idols. Jacob became angry and argued with Laban. "What did I do wrong?" he demanded of Laban. "What sin of mine prompted you to chase after me in hot pursuit? When you searched through all my goods, did you find anything that belonged to you? Set it here before my relatives and yours, and let them settle the dispute between the two of us. I have been with you for the past 20 years. Your ewes and female goats have not miscarried, nor have I eaten rams from your flocks. Animals torn by wild beasts I never brought to you. I always absorbed the loss myself. You always made me pay for every missing animal, whether it was taken by day or at night. I was consumed by scorching heat during the day and by piercing cold at night, and I went without sleep. This was my lot for 20 years in your house. I worked like a slave for you, 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your flocks. But you changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, the one whom Isaac fears, had not been with me, you would certainly have sent me away empty-handed. But God saw how I was oppressed and how hard I worked, and he rebuked you last night." Laban replied to Jacob, "These women are my daughters, these children are my grandchildren, and these flocks are my flocks. All that you see belongs to me. But how can I harm these daughters of mine today, or the children to whom they have given birth? So now come, let's make a formal agreement, you and I, and it will be proof that we have made peace." So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a memorial pillar. Then he said to his relatives, "Gather stones." So they brought stones and put them in a pile. They ate there by the pile of stones. Laban called it Jegar Sahadutha, but Jacob called it Galid. Laban said, "This pile of stones is a witness of our agreement today." That is why it was called Galid. It was also called Mizpah, because he said, "May the Lord watch between us when we are out of sight of one another." If you mistreat my daughters, or if you take wives besides my daughters, although no one is with us, realize that God is witness to your actions. Here is this pile of stones and this pillar I have set up between me and you," Laban said to Jacob. "This pile of stones and the pillar are reminders that I will not pass beyond this pile to come to harm you, and that you will not pass beyond this pile and this pillar to come to harm me. May the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the gods of their father, judge between us." Jacob took an oath by the God whom his father Isaac feared. Then Jacob offered a sacrifice on the mountain and invited his relatives to eat the meal. They ate the meal and spent the night on the mountain. Early in the morning, Laban kissed his grandchildren and his daughters goodbye and blessed them. Then Laban left and returned home. So Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he exclaimed, "This is the camp of God." So he named that place Mahanaim. Jacob sent messengers on ahead to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the region of Edom. He commanded them, "This is what you must say to my lord Esau. This is what your servant Jacob says. I have been staying with Laban until now. I have oxen, donkeys, sheep, and male and female servants. I have sent this message to inform my lord, so that I may find favor in your sight." The messengers returned to Jacob and said, "We went to your brother Esau. He is coming to meet you, and has 400 men with him." Jacob was very afraid and upset, so he divided the people who were with him into 2 camps, as well as the flocks, herds, and camels. If Esau attacks one camp, he thought, then the other camp will be able to escape. Then Jacob prayed, "O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, O Lord, you said to me, 'Return to your land and to your relatives, and I will make you prosper.' I'm not worthy of all the faithful love you have shown your servant. With only my walking stick, I crossed the Jordan. But now I have become 2 camps. Rescue me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid he will come and attack me, as well as the mothers with their children. But you said, 'I will certainly make you prosper, and will make your descendants like the sand on the seashore, too numerous to count.'" It's interesting. It seems like Jacob has these times of crisis in his life, and he's turning to God now. Whereas previously, there wasn't a lot of faith there. At Bethel, it was like, if you give me all these things and return me here safely, then you'll be my God, type thing. But in his accusation against Laban, he said, I've worked for you these 20 years, and you've changed my wages 10 times. And if the God of my father, in 31:42, the God of Abraham, the one whom Isaac fears, had not been with me, you would certainly have sent me away empty-handed. But God saw how I was oppressed and how hard I worked, and he rebuked you last night. He knows that it's ultimately God who was watching out for him. And he was, because it sounds like Laban was pretty angry at Jacob, enough to do him harm. But when it came down to it, it looks like he didn't want to do it. But how can I harm these daughters of mine today, or the children to whom they have given birth? Yeah, it wasn't. It doesn't seem like it was for any love of Jacob that he did this. And it's interesting too, just how Jacob could work for this man for 20 years and prosper him. Laban was certainly not poor by any stretch of the imagination. And the envy from Jacob becoming more prosperous than him results in this hatred. So, yeah. Yeah, and so you have Jacob going back to the land of his birth and coming to Mahanaim, and then sending out messengers to his brother Esau. And the messengers come back and say to him, "Oh yeah, we saw Esau, and he's coming to meet you with 400 men." And Jacob is pretty sure this means war, and he prays to God. He tells God, "Hey, you promised to me. You said, 'Return to your land and to your relatives, and I will make you prosper.'" And he says, "Rescue me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I'm afraid he will come and attack me." And he suffixes it with, "I will certainly make, you said, I will certainly make you prosper and will make your descendants like the sand on the seashore, too numerous to count." Yeah, so he reminds God of his promise twice in that. Yeah, so Jacob was hanging on the promise of God there. And he could have fled, but he didn't. Though, I don't know, his camp was pretty slow, evidenced by the fact that when he was departing, Laban and his company caught up with his whole company, even given a 3-day head start. Yeah, but certainly there were instances of Jacob's lack of faith and deceptive nature. Because Jacob stole away, unknown to Laban the Syrian. God already told Jacob to go and had promised him safe passage. Jacob's fear and deceptive departure showed that he lacked confidence in God and his promise, and he relied more on his own wisdom and ability. Yeah. He could have announced his departure and gone in the glory of an army with banners, but fear made it impossible to reap the full measure of blessing. He sneaked away into the will of God instead of departing in triumph. Yeah, and Rachel stole the household idols as well. Headed toward the mountains of Gilead. It was nearly 300 miles from Haran to the mountains of Gilead, but the journey was longer and more difficult psychologically than it was physically for Jacob. He left the place of safety, where he lived in a comfortable servitude, to go to a place where God called him, but there were many dangerous enemies, such as his brother Esau, who had sworn to kill him. God had come to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night. Apparently, Laban did have an evil intention against Jacob, yet God protected Jacob through this dream by night, telling Laban to be careful in his dealings with Jacob. In the mountains of Gilead is where they met up. At this point, Jacob was not far from the Jordan River in the Promised Land. This shows that he traveled quickly, and that Laban was determined to pursue him this far. "Why did you flee away secretly?" Laban said. Laban first tried to shame Jacob with kindness, suggesting that they would have had a celebration at his departure. Apparently that idea was met with an unsympathetic response, so Laban threatened Jacob, "It is in my power to do you harm." Why did you steal my gods? Laban ended his words to Jacob with an accusing question. He knew that his teraphim were missing, and he had reason to believe that Jacob had stolen them. Laban's question shows the foolishness of idolatry. It is sad and strange to have a god that can be stolen. Yeah. Far from being able to protect you, you have to protect it. Rachel had taken the household idols and put them in the camel's saddle and sat on them. Rachel learned the ways of deception well from her father and perhaps also from her husband. She succeeded in deceiving her father about the idols. Then Jacob was angry and rebuked Laban. It is likely that this anger built up in Jacob for a long time, perhaps 20 years. Perhaps in his mind he practiced this speech over and over again. What is my trespass? Jacob rebuked Laban and made the case for his own innocence with several examples. What part of your household things have you found? After searching, Laban found no evidence of the stolen gods he accused Jacob of taking, nor evidence of his own possessions in the midst of Jacob's. These 20 years I have been with you. Jacob's 20 years of faithful service proved his integrity. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried. This demonstrated the care Jacob showed for the success of Laban's herds. I have not eaten the rams of your flock. Jacob didn't feed or enrich himself at the expense of what belonged to Laban. That which was torn by beasts I did not bring to you. It was an ancient custom that a shepherd could bring the torn carcass of a sheep to his owner as evidence that he was brave enough to not let the wolf devour it or take it away, and thus the shepherd would be excused. Jacob explained he didn't follow this custom, and every animal that was attacked or stolen he replaced out of his own herd. Drought consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep departed. Jacob worked hard and sacrificed for the success of Laban's enterprise. And you have changed my wages 10 times. Jacob endured repeated unfairness from Laban as his employer. It was good that Jacob saw God's presence and protection in all this. Unfortunately, nowhere did Jacob claim God as his own. He referred to God as the fear of his father Isaac and the God of his grandfather Abraham. All that you see is mine. Laban boldly said that everything Jacob had actually belonged to him. Yet in a supposed act of generosity, he said to Jacob, "It is mine, but out of the kindness of my heart, I'll let you have it." May the Lord watch between you and me when we are absent one from another. In this covenant, Laban expressed how suspicious he was of Jacob. The idea of Mizpah, watch, is, if you do wrong, God will see it, and may he punish. In effect, the pillar of Mizpah meant, if you come over on my side of this line, the pact is void and I will kill you. The covenant breaker would need God to take care of him because the other would shoot to kill. Mizpah was never meant to be a nice sentiment, despite what a Mizpah coin shared between two people might say. I will not pass beyond this heap to you. The best solution for Jacob's in-law problems was for him to separate from Laban. Therefore they set up a pillar to be a barrier between them. Then Laban departed and returned to his place. After a proper goodbye, Laban saw his daughters and grandchildren for the last time. Jacob took his family to Canaan and never returned to where Laban lived. This is the last we hear of Laban in the Bible, and it is good that this is the end of him. Laban is of the world, and Jacob needed to be free from the world in order to live wholeheartedly for the God of his fathers. Rather than seeking to follow the truth of God's plan as witnessed by Jacob, he merely resented and coveted the blessing of God on Jacob. He finally ended up with neither. His life constitutes a sober warning to a great host of semi-religious, but fundamentally self-worshipping and self-seeking men and women today. Rachel and Leah were wrong to look to their father Laban for their portion or inheritance. Once they were married to Jacob, he now was their portion and inheritance. Since you are saved and joined to Christ, appraise the world and ask, is there yet any portion for me? If you think there is, you are mistaken. Yeah. It's short, but you also have the angels of God meeting Jacob in Mahanaim. We don't know exactly what this means. In some ways, angelic beings that are normally unseen were now made visible to Jacob, and they met him. Perhaps God wanted Jacob to know how great his care was for him and his family. This wonderful revelation of God's presence and care came after Jacob finally separated from Laban, the worldly man. Separation from the world brings greater insight to the believer. This is God's camp. Literally, Jacob observed he was in a double camp. He was not alone. God had a camp of angels to be with him at Mahanaim. Jacob, seeking to reconcile with his brother, who 20 years before had sworn to kill him, first began by humbling himself and began his message with, "Your servant Jacob. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, and male and female servants." Jacob wasn't boasting. He wanted Esau to know that he was a man of wealth and that he didn't come to take anything from Esau. Jacob tried to anticipate his brother's thinking and to answer Esau's concerns. Esau is coming to meet you with 400 men. When the messengers returned, Jacob heard news that gave him great concern. Esau was coming to meet him with 400 men. Because Jacob could not bring himself to think the best of Esau, for understandable reasons, he was convinced the 400 men were an army intending to destroy him and his family. Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. When Laban confronted Jacob with a hostile militia, Jacob boldly stood up to him and spoke his mind. Yet Jacob was afraid to meet Esau. This was because Jacob knew he was in the right with Laban, but he knew he was in the wrong with Esau. He had wronged his brother, and you cannot do a wrong without being haunted by it afterwards. Shakespeare was right when he wrote, "Conscience does make cowards of us all." As Jacob had no strength before Esau because of his guilt, many Christians today are also hindered by memory of their past sins and failings. Jacob had every reason to believe God would protect him. He seems to have forgotten God had a special camp of angels there to protect him. His great fear and distress was not appropriate for someone under God's protection. In splitting his company, Jacob used human wisdom and schemes to prepare for Esau's coming. He should have trusted that God could protect all he had. Jacob forgot about God's two camps and tried to make his own two companies. Interesting. After first reacting in fear and unbelief, Jacob did the right thing. He went to the Lord and prayed a good prayer, humble, full of faith, full of thanksgiving and God's word. Jacob's prayer had God's words. He also quoted God's promises. From Spurgeon here. When God gave his promise, he did, as it were, put himself in the power of those who know how to plead the promise. Every promise is so much strength given to the man who has faith in the promise, for he may with it overcome even the omnipotent God himself. That is, God said he would do this thing, and Jacob is now holding it over God's head of, you said you would do this, and you're a just and true God, so do it. Deliver me, I pray. His prayer had faith. He boldly asked God to do something and gave humble grounds for why the Lord should fulfill his word. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you have a great day. Bye.